Hey guys, welcome to the video on chapter 3.1. This video is going to talk about basically two things. I want you guys to understand how abiotic factors and biotic factors can affect a population. And I want you guys to understand how an ecosystem recovers after some kind of a disruption. Now, in this context, disruption means some kind of a natural disaster of some kind. It could also be caused by humans or maybe even by an animal of some kind. Basically, something that hurts an environment. Now, the first key term this chapter talks about is something we call community. Community is a very fancy way of saying a biological community. So it is a group of interacting populations in the same area. Um, the first key idea this chapter introduces is the idea of a limiting factor. A limiting factor is an abiotic or biotic factor that limits the number, reproduction, or distribution of an organism. So, for example, a predator would be a limiting factor because a predator is going to kill animals in the area and is going to limit the number of animals that are possible. A parasite does the exact same thing. A parasite weakens you, it makes you weaker, it makes it harder for you to find a mate, to find food, things like that. Some of the abiotic limiting factors would be too hot. If it's too hot, you can't go out and find food. If it's too cold, you can't go out and find food or a mate or something like that. Not enough water, another good example. If you're dehydrated, you're not going to be as effective. The bottom part there, make sure you can think of some limiting factors of your own because there will definitely be a question like this on the quiz and definitely on the final exam. Next idea, tolerance. Tolerance is the ability of an organism to survive when subjected to biotic or abiotic factors. Um, Another way to word this is that tolerance is your ability to resist limiting factors. So, a good example might be how many predators are too many. If there are too many predators in an ecosystem, that's going to potentially destroy the population. It'll kill all the animals in the area. If it drops to becoming too cold or too hot, that could end up killing the organism as well. How much water do you need? If you don't have enough water, you might not survive. But tolerance is your ability to survive these things. So, how much water is too little? How much water is too much? How much temperature, how much heat is too much, and how much cold is too cold? That's what all tolerance really is. Ecological succession. Ecological succession is this idea that one community replaces another as a result of changes in abiotic or biotic factors. And what that means is this: is that say a flood goes through and wipes out an entire area. It goes you're now back to the very beginning. All you have there is dirt. Ecological succession states that the organisms will eventually return back to the area, and they'll do so in a predictable way. Um, but it also happens in some other points too. So, say an area begins to get more water. Well, if an area begins to get more water, well, then more types of plants are going to be able to survive, and as a result, it's going to push what we call ecological succession forward. So rather than saying just having grasses, and grasses are really good in surviving in dry environments. If you get more water in an area where there's just grass, well, now trees can survive, and now trees will begin to grow. So that's going to push the ecological succession forward. And it goes in the opposite way too. If an area doesn't get enough water, you might end up going from a grassy area to a drier area. It just goes from a grassy area to more like a desert because of changes in the amount of water you get. That's the idea behind ecological succession. There are two types of succession that we've talked about in class. There's a bunch of other ones too, but these are the key ones you have to know about. The first one is called primary succession. This is succession caused when all the soil has been removed. All the dirt's basically gone. A good example of this is what I have here. If a volcano covers the area with lava, you're not going to have any dirt for things to grow back. That's going to cause primary succession. Secondary succession is when the soil survives and life gets to move back in. So if a forest fire goes through and destroys a forest, The fire doesn't destroy the soil, it just destroys the living organisms on the top part of it. So life can come back faster. The big difference between primary and secondary succession, guys, is that primary succession has topsoil and primary succession doesn't have topsoil and secondary succession has topsoil. Primary succession tends to take longer than secondary succession. Primary succession can also remove organisms permanently from the area as well. I didn't talk about that in class. This is kind of one of those interesting things. A climax community. This is a stable community that does not change over time. So, say a fire destroys an area. 100 years later, pretty much the exact same community will have returned. So all the same animals that were there before the fire will return in about 100 years. That's a good example of a climax community. Um, I asked a question here. I asked, do you think a climax community is possible? There is some debate in this in biology and ecology. I'm not very familiar with it because I'm more on the biochemistry side of things. But the argument is going that since the environment always changes, it's probably impossible to have a climax community. And I agree with on that. I think it's a real challenge to sit there and think that we can say that there's a community that will be the end of all communities. I think there will be a shift over time. Okay, this is a good graph I showed in class. I wanted to explain it here as well. This is a graph of succession. This one is going to be secondary succession because the fire right here destroyed the forest but didn't actually do anything else other than that. So after a year or two, you see small annual plants begin to appear. In 3 or 4 years, you get the grasses and other they're hardier plants. They can survive a little better. Then you get shrubs. These are bigger plants, they're able to survive better environments. You get pines, and as you see, you eventually you move up the list. Every couple of years, a new group of organisms comes into the area. Now, let me give an example. Let's say there's a fire in my hometown of Spokane. We'll go through ecological succession right here, but it'll stop right here. And the reason why is that in order to have anything above this rate, this point here, anything in this region, you have to have lots of water. If you don't have lots of water, you go down this way over here. So my area stops usually around here. If I go farther south of my hometown where we get more water, you begin to see these things begin to develop over here. Same is true. If my area all of a sudden received less rain, I would start to see shrubs, grasses, and herbs. It would go backwards. So ecological succession just isn't always moving forward. It can go both ways. One more example. I showed this in class, but I figured we'd be going to show. This is an example of primary succession because the lava is covering up the soil. So whatever's going to happen at the end of this, essentially, the plants are going to have to grow through this without the help of the soil, the dirt here on the ground. Alright guys, that's the end of my video lesson on 3.1. If you have any questions, please come see me during break time or during class if we have time. And thank you very much for watching.